Hello, amazing viewers. Welcome back to Holy Histories, your favorite channel, where we bring epic Bible stories back to life. If you're passionate about spiritual growth, history, faith, and jaw-dropping stories of heroism and miracles, you've come to the right place. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to Holy Histories if you haven't already, and click the notification bell so you never miss a new message. Let's get started. Today, we dive into one of the most astounding stories from the book of Judges, a tale of a timid farmer turned warrior, a miraculous battle plan, and a victory that defied all odds. Imagine an army of only 300 men, armed with nothing but trumpets, jars, and torches, taking on a massive, terrifying enemy. This sounds impossible, right? Well, that's exactly what happened in the story of Gideon and his 300 men. Get ready for a thrilling journey of faith, courage, and divine intervention. Let's jump right in. The story of Gideon and his 300 men unfolds in Judges chapter 6 to 8, set against the backdrop of Israel's suffering under Midianite oppression. There was a sense of pervasive dread and oppression among the Israelites. They had turned away from God, engaging in idolatry and evil practices, which led to their subjugation by the Midianites for 7 years. The Midianites, along with the Amalekites and other eastern peoples, ravaged Israel's land, destroying crops and livestock, leaving the Israelites impoverished and desperate. In their distress, the Israelites cried out to God for help. In response, God chose an unlikely hero, Gideon, a man from the tribe of Manasseh, to deliver Israel. Gideon's selection is notable because he was a man riddled with doubts and feelings of inadequacy. He considered himself insignificant and his clan the weakest in Manasseh. This choice underscores a recurring biblical theme. God often uses the seemingly weak and unimportant to accomplish great things. Gideon, the son of Joash, is found threshing wheat in a winepress, a telling sign of the fear that grips Israel. He is hiding from the Midianites. When the angel of the Lord appears to him with the words, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior," Gideon's response is filled with skepticism and a sense of insignificance. He questions, "Pardon me, my Lord, but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about?" Gideon's initial response to God's call was one of doubt and hesitation. His questions reveal not only his doubt in his own capabilities, but also his doubt in God's presence and power amidst their suffering. The angel's message is direct. Gideon is to save Israel from the Midianites. Yet, Gideon is unconvinced. He sees himself as the least in his family, which is itself the weakest in the tribe of Manasseh. His humility borders on disbelief in his worthiness and ability to undertake such a monumental task. "How can I save Israel?" he asks, voicing his inner turmoil and sense of inadequacy. He requests signs from God to confirm his will, the most famous being the fleece tests. Understanding Gideon's need for reassurance, God provides a series of signs to bolster his faith. The first sign comes when Gideon, seeking confirmation of the divine message, prepares an offering of a young goat, an unleavened bread. He presents it to the angel of the Lord under the oak at Ophrah. The angel instructs him to place the offering on a rock and pour broth over it. Then, with the tip of his staff, the angel touches the offering, and fire flares from the rock, consuming the meat and bread. Astonished and overwhelmed, Gideon realizes that he has indeed encountered a divine messenger, saying, "Alas, sovereign Lord, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." Despite this miraculous sign, Gideon's doubts are not entirely dispelled. He seeks further confirmation, asking God for another sign involving a fleece. First, Gideon asks that the fleece alone be wet with dew, while the ground around it remains dry. God grants this request, and the next morning, Gideon wrings out a bowl full of water from the fleece, while the ground is dry. Still seeking assurance, Gideon requests the reverse, that the fleece remains dry while the ground is covered with dew. God once again responds to Gideon's request, and the following morning the fleece is dry and the ground is wet with dew. God graciously grants these signs, bolstering Gideon's faith. Through these signs, God patiently addresses Gideon's fears and uncertainties. Each miraculous event serves to strengthen Gideon's faith and resolve, preparing him for the daunting task ahead. Gideon's story illustrates a profound truth about the human condition. Even those chosen for great deeds often grapple with doubts and feelings of inadequacy. Yet, with divine reassurance and faith, they can rise to fulfill their destinies. Having received confirmation, Gideon put out the call for an army, and he managed to assemble a considerable force, an army from various tribes of Israel. Judges chapter 7 verse 3 mentions that 32,000 men gathered to follow Gideon. This number, while impressive, was still dwarfed by the combined forces of the Midianites and Amalekites, who were described as being as numerous as locusts, with their camels being without number. Judges chapter 7 verse 12. However, God informed Gideon that the army was too large, expressing concern that Israel might claim victory by their strength rather than acknowledging divine intervention. The Israelite force comprised men from various tribes, including Manasseh, Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali. The composition of this initial army was quite diverse. It included seasoned warriors, younger men eager to prove their valor, and those who, driven by patriotism and faith, were ready to fight for their freedom and their God. These men brought with them whatever weapons they could muster, ranging from swords and spears to perhaps even more rudimentary tools of war, considering the impoverished state of Israel at that time. Despite the relative strength of Gideon's initial force, God had a different plan. He wanted to ensure that Israel's impending victory could not be attributed to their strength or numbers, but solely to his power. Thus, God instructed Gideon to reduce the size of his army. To reduce the numbers, God instructed Gideon to first send home those who were fearful, and then further reduce the number by a test of how they drank water. Ultimately, Gideon's army was pared down to 300 men, an improbably small force to confront the vast Midianite army. The first step in this reduction process involved addressing the issue of fear. God commanded Gideon to proclaim to the army, "Whoever is fearful and trembling, let him return home." Judges chapter 7 verse 3. This directive was based on a principle found in Deuteronomy chapter 20 verse 8, which advised sending home any man who was afraid to prevent his fear from affecting others. Remarkably, 22,000 men, or nearly 2/3 of the assembled force, chose to leave, leaving Gideon with only 10,000 men. This dramatic reduction was a test of faith for Gideon and the remaining soldiers. It demonstrated a willingness to trust in God's plan despite seemingly worsening odds. For the soldiers who stayed, this was an affirmation of their courage and commitment. However, even with 10,000 men, the Israelites were still vastly outnumbered by the Midianites. God, however, was not finished refining his chosen force. He told Gideon that the army was still too large. To further reduce the number, God devised a test involving how the men drank water. Gideon led his men down to the water, where God observed their drinking habits. Those who lapped the water with their tongues like dogs were set apart from those who knelt down to drink. Out of the 10,000 men, only 300 lapped the water, with their hands to their mouths. The rest knelt to drink. This distinction seems arbitrary, but it served God's purpose. The 300 who lapped the water were chosen, and God assured Gideon, "With the 300 men who lapped, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hand." Judges chapter 7 verse 7. The remaining 9,700 men were sent home. These 300 men, now Gideon's army, were not chosen for their physical prowess or military experience, but were selected by a process that underscored God's sovereignty and the importance of faith and obedience. With this minuscule force, Gideon was to face an enemy as numerous as locusts. The reduction of Gideon's army to just 300 men set the stage for a miraculous victory that would be remembered throughout Israel's history. This small, unlikely band of warriors, under the leadership of Gideon and the guidance of God, would go on to achieve an extraordinary triumph, demonstrating that true strength and victory comes from reliance on God rather than human might or numbers. In the end, Gideon, now convinced of his calling and empowered by God's assurance, leads a mere 300 men to a stunning victory against the Midianites, demonstrating that divine power, not human strength, is the true source of deliverance. God's strategy for the battle was unconventional. Armed with trumpets, jars, and torches, Gideon's 300 men surrounded the Midianite camp by night. At Gideon's signal, they broke the jars, revealing the torches, blew the trumpets, and shouted, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon!" The sudden commotion and brilliant light threw the Midianites into panic and confusion, causing them to turn on each other in the chaos. Those who survived fled, and Israel pursued them to complete the rout. The initial recruitment of Gideon's army and its subsequent reduction highlights a powerful narrative of faith, obedience, and divine intervention. Starting with 32,000 men and ending with just 300, the story illustrates that God's ways often defy human logic, emphasizing that victory in seemingly impossible situations comes through his power and guidance. The reduction of Gideon's army is a timeless testament to the principle that faith and trust in God can overcome even the most overwhelming odds. God's strategy for Gideon was unconventional. Instead of using swords, shields, or traditional weapons, Gideon was instructed to arm his men with trumpets, empty jars, and torches. When the moment came, the execution was flawless. Let's quickly have a detailed look at this remarkable battle plan. Trumpets. Each of the 300 men carried a shofar, a ram's horn trumpet. In ancient times, the trumpet was often used to signal troops in battle. The loud and sudden sound of the shofar was intended to create confusion and fear among the enemy. At Gideon's signal, all 300 men blew their trumpets. The sudden, loud noise of the shofars would have been deafening, especially in the quiet of the night. This sound was intended to startle and awaken the Midianite soldiers, causing confusion and panic. Jars. The men also carried clay jars. These jars were empty and would be smashed at a specific moment. The sound of the breaking jars would add to the chaos and surprise. Simultaneously, Gideon's men broke their clay jars. The sound of breaking pottery, coupled with the trumpet blasts, added to the chaos. The noise suggested a large-scale attack, creating the illusion of a massive force. Torches. Inside the jars, the men concealed lit torches. The jars would hide the light until the moment they were broken. The sudden appearance of 300 torches in the darkness would create the illusion of a vast army. As the jars were broken by Gideon's army, the concealed torches were revealed. The sudden appearance of hundreds of flames around the camp gave the impression that the Midianites were completely surrounded by a vast army. The battle cry. The men shouted, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon!" This war cry further terrified the Midianites, reinforcing the belief that they were under attack by a mighty and divine force. The combination of the loud noises, the sudden lights, and the battle cries threw the Midianite camp into disarray. The soldiers, in their confusion and panic, turned on each other, mistaking fellow Midianites for enemies. This internal chaos led to a massive slaughter within the camp. The shock and confusion caused the Midianites to flee. Gideon and his men pursued them, and with the help of other Israelite tribes who joined the chase, they were able to defeat the Midianite forces completely. This victory was not just a military triumph, but a significant spiritual milestone for Israel. Gideon divided his 300 men into 3 companies of 100 each. This strategic division allowed them to surround the Midianite camp from different sides. First, the 3 companies took positions around the Midianite camp during the night. They spread out, encircling the enemy forces. The second is the timing. Gideon chose the middle watch of the night, roughly around midnight, to launch the attack. This was a time when the camp would be in deep sleep and least prepared for an assault. The last, but not the least, is the synchronization. At Gideon's signal, all 3 companies acted in unison. The men blew their trumpets, smashed their jars, and revealed the torches. This synchronized action amplified the impact of the surprise. The story of Gideon and his 300 men is profoundly important in Christianity for several reasons. It exemplifies themes of faith, divine empowerment, humility, and the dangers of idolatry. Gideon's victory with just 300 men teaches several important lessons. The first lesson is faith and obedience. Gideon's success was rooted in his faith and obedience to God's unconventional plan. Despite the seemingly illogical strategy, Gideon trusted in God's wisdom. This story is a powerful testament to the importance of faith and obedience to God's will. Despite his initial doubts and fears, Gideon ultimately trusted God's guidance and followed his seemingly irrational instructions. This narrative encourages Christians to trust in God's plan, even when it appears counterintuitive or daunting. Gideon's faith journey from doubt to trust mirrors the spiritual journey that many believers experience. Gideon's journey from doubt to faith is a powerful testament to the importance of trusting and obeying God's instructions, even when they seem illogical or challenging. Second lesson learned is divine empowerment. The dramatic reduction of Gideon's army highlights the principle that God's power is made perfect in weakness. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9. By using a small, seemingly inadequate force to achieve victory, God demonstrated that success comes not from human strength or numbers, but from His divine power. This lesson reassures Christians that God can use anyone, regardless of their perceived inadequacies, to fulfill His purposes. The victory demonstrated that true power comes from God, not from human strength or numbers. It was a reminder to the Israelites that their deliverance depended on their relationship with God. The story emphasizes that victory comes not through human might or numbers, but through reliance on God. This theme is pivotal in Christian teaching, illustrating the principle that God's power is made perfect in weakness. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 9. The third lesson is humility and leadership. Gideon's humble origins and initial reluctance to lead are central to his story. His humility and recognition of his own limitations contrasted sharply with the grandeur of the task God set before him. This underscores the Christian ideal that true leadership is rooted in humility and reliance on God, rather than on personal prowess or ambition. Gideon's leadership exemplified courage, humility, and reliance on divine guidance. His ability to rally a small, dedicated group to achieve a great victory serves as a model for effective leadership. The fourth lesson is strategic thinking. Gideon's battle plan highlighted the importance of strategy, timing, and psychological warfare in achieving victory. Instead of relying solely on brute force, Gideon crafted an innovative approach that leveraged surprise and confusion to overcome a numerically superior enemy. Strategic thinking involves planning and decision-making that carefully considers long-term goals and potential obstacles. Gideon didn't rush into battle without a plan. He assessed the situation and devised a strategy that would give his smaller force the best chance of success. This underscores the idea that careful planning and foresight are often more valuable than sheer numbers or brute strength. Timing was crucial in Gideon's strategy. He chose to attack at night when the enemy was least prepared, maximizing the element of surprise. This teaches us that knowing when to act is just as important as knowing how to act. By choosing the right moment, Gideon was able to catch the enemy off guard and gain a significant advantage. Gideon understood the power of psychological warfare. His plan included tactics designed to instill fear and confusion in the enemy ranks. For example, he instructed his men to blow trumpets, break jars, and hold torches, creating the illusion of a much larger force. This psychological tactic caused panic among the enemy, leading them to turn on each other in the chaos. This aspect of his strategy demonstrates that understanding and manipulating the enemy's perception can be a powerful tool in warfare and competition. Gideon's approach was highly innovative. Instead of following traditional methods of warfare, he thought outside the box and used unconventional tactics to his advantage. This lesson can be applied to many areas of life and business. Sometimes the best solutions come from thinking creatively and challenging the status quo. Gideon's strategy allowed him to overcome a numerically superior enemy, proving that with the right approach, even smaller forces can achieve great victories. This highlights the importance of leveraging one's strengths and exploiting the weaknesses of the opposition. It serves as a reminder that determination and ingenuity can often level the playing field against seemingly insurmountable odds. The principles of strategic thinking, timing, and psychological tactics are not limited to warfare. They can be applied in various fields such as business, sports, and personal development. For instance, in business, strategic planning and market analysis can help a smaller company compete against larger rivals. In sports, a well-timed play or psychological edge can turn the tide of a game. In personal growth, strategic goal setting and mental resilience can help individuals overcome challenges and achieve their aspirations. Furthermore, recognizing our weakness and dependency on God is crucial for spiritual growth. In a world that values self-reliance and strength, Gideon's story reminds us that true strength comes from acknowledging our limitations and relying on God. This perspective shifts our focus from what we can do to what God can do through us, opening the door for His power to manifest in our lives. Being spiritually ready and alert is essential in our walk with God. Just as Gideon's 300 men were chosen for their vigilance, we must cultivate a lifestyle of spiritual preparedness. This involves regular prayer, studying God's Word, and being attentive to His leading. When we are spiritually alert, we are better equipped to recognize and respond to God's opportunities and challenges. In addition to the lessons above, courage to act on God's instructions is another key lesson. Gideon's story encourages us to move beyond our fears and insecurities and take bold steps of faith. Whether it's sharing our faith, serving in ministry, or standing up for what is right, acting courageously for God can lead to significant impact and transformation. Throughout Gideon's story, God's faithfulness to His people is evident. Despite Israel's repeated disobedience, God responds to their cries for help and provides deliverance. This assurance of God's unwavering faithfulness is a cornerstone of Christian belief, offering comfort and hope to believers. Despite all of Gideon's valorous efforts and strategic prowess, he ultimately succumbed to the relentless tide of adversity. The narrative also reinforces the belief in God's sovereignty and His ability to deliver His people from seemingly insurmountable challenges. This provides Christians with hope and assurance in God's providence and intervention in their lives. Gideon can be seen as Christ in his role as a deliverer of Israel. Just as Gideon delivered Israel from Midianite oppression, Jesus delivers humanity from the oppression of sin. The victory with a small, seemingly insignificant group also prefigures the idea that God often works through the humble and the lowly to achieve His purposes. If you have watched to this point, I believe you would agree that the story of Gideon and his 300 men is a timeless narrative of faith, divine intervention, and strategic brilliance. It underscores the importance of trust in God, the power of innovative thinking, and the impact of leadership grounded in humility and obedience. Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Now let us take a look at Gideon's development. Gideon begins as a reluctant leader, doubting his capabilities and requiring multiple signs from God to reassure him of his mission. Judges chapter 6, verse 36 to 40. As the story progresses, Gideon's faith and confidence grow. His obedience in reducing his army from 32,000 to 300 men as per God's instruction demonstrates his increasing trust in God's plan. Gideon's leadership qualities, including his strategic thinking, ability to inspire and command loyalty, and reliance on divine guidance, are key aspects of his character development. 300 men. Selection process. The process of selecting the 300 men based on how they drank water, Judges chapter 7, verse 5 to 7, can be seen as a test of vigilance and readiness, highlighting the importance of careful selection in leadership and military contexts. The chosen 300 also displayed loyalty and courage, willing to follow Gideon despite overwhelming odds, underscoring themes of bravery and faith in the narrative. Gideon's leadership continued beyond this victory, securing peace for Israel during his lifetime. However, his story also includes cautionary elements, particularly his creation of an ephod from the gold plundered from the Midianites, which eventually became an object of idolatrous worship. After Gideon's remarkable victory over the Midianites with his band of 300 men, the Israelites offered him kingship, saying, "Rule over us, you and your son, and your grandson also, for you have saved us from the hand of Midian." Judges chapter 8, verse 22. Gideon, however, refused the offer, declaring that the Lord would rule over Israel. This act of humility was commendable, but it set the stage for a critical error in judgment that would mar his legacy. Gideon requested a portion of the gold earrings taken as spoils from the defeated Midianites. With these, he fashioned an ephod, a sacred priestly garment, which he placed in his hometown of Ophrah. The creation of this ephod is shrouded in ambiguity, as the text does not provide a detailed explanation of Gideon's intentions. Some scholars suggest that Gideon may have intended the ephod to serve as a memorial of the divine victory, a tangible reminder of God's deliverance. Others speculate that Gideon sought to establish a localized center of worship, possibly to rival the established religious practices in Shiloh, where the official tabernacle stood. Whatever Gideon's intentions, the consequences of creating the ephod were dire. The Bible records, "All Israel prostituted themselves by worshiping it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and his family." Judges chapter 8 to 27. The ephod, instead of being a symbol of God's deliverance, became an object of idolatrous worship. The people of Israel, who were prone to religious syncretism, began to venerate the ephod as a divine artifact, thus diverting their worship from the Lord. This act of idolatry had several negative impacts. Firstly, it undermined the central worship of Yahweh, leading to spiritual corruption among the Israelites. Instead of fostering a relationship with the true God, the ephod became a focal point for superstitious practices and false worship. Secondly, it sowed the seeds of disunity within the nation. By setting up a separate place of worship in Ophrah, Gideon inadvertently contributed to the fragmentation of Israel's religious life, which later became a significant issue during the period of the divided monarchy. The decline into idolatry that followed the creation of the ephod had far-reaching consequences for Israel. After Gideon's death, the Bible states, "The Israelites again prostituted themselves to the Baals, They set up Baal-berith as their god and did not remember the Lord their God, who had rescued them from the hands of all their enemies on every side. Judges chapter 8, verse 33 to 34. This relapse into pagan worship was a stark contrast to the spiritual revival that Gideon's leadership had initially brought about. Gideon's own family was not immune to the repercussions of this idolatry. His son Abimelech, born to a concubine in Shechem, sought to consolidate power by eliminating his brothers. Abimelech's ruthless ambition led to a massacre, with only one brother, Jotham, escaping the slaughter. Abimelech then declared himself king, marking a brief and bloody attempt at monarchy that ended in his violent death. This internal strife and bloodshed within Gideon's family reflected the broader chaos and moral decay that idolatry had unleashed upon Israel. The impact of Gideon's ephod on Israel and the subsequent decline into idolatry was profound and multifaceted. It not only affected the immediate generation, but also set a precedent for future cycles of apostasy and repentance in Israel's history. The period of the Judges is characterized by a recurring pattern of the Israelites falling into idolatry, facing oppression, crying out to God, and being delivered by a judge. Gideon's ephod episode exemplifies this cycle and highlights the deep-rooted nature of Israel's spiritual waywardness. Moreover, the idolatry associated with Gideon's ephod contributed to the weakening of Israel's national identity. Instead of being a people set apart for the worship of Yahweh, Israel increasingly blended with the surrounding Canaanite cultures, adopting their gods and practices. This syncretism eroded the distinctiveness of Israel's faith and led to moral and social disintegration. The story of Gideon's later years serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of spiritual complacency and the allure of idolatry. It underscores the importance of faithful and exclusive worship of the true God and the perils of deviating from his commandments. Gideon's initial humility and reliance on God contrasted sharply with the later actions that led to idolatry and strife, illustrating the complexity of human character and the constant need for vigilance in spiritual matters. Gideon's story, particularly the episode of the ephod, remains a powerful lesson in the importance of steadfast faith and the dangers of turning away from God's commands. The story of Gideon and his 300 men continues to inspire countless generations, reminding us that true strength is not found in numbers or conventional power, but in faith, obedience, and the courage to act on God's calling. Gideon's story carries profound lessons and a rich legacy that resonates through the ages. Gideon's initial hesitation and doubts eventually gave way to faith and obedience. His willingness to trust in God's guidance, despite overwhelming odds, inspires believers to step out in faith even when circumstances seem dire. Gideon's unconventional military strategy showcased his resourcefulness and reliance on divine wisdom rather than sheer numbers. This teaches us the value of innovation and thinking beyond conventional wisdom. Despite his remarkable victory, Gideon remained humble, deflecting praise and acknowledging God's role in their triumph. This humility is a timeless lesson in acknowledging the source of our strength and achievements. Gideon's leadership style, characterized by listening to God's instructions and rallying his followers, serves as a model for effective leadership grounded in faith and integrity. In a world fraught with uncertainty, Gideon's story encourages believers to trust in God's guidance even when facing overwhelming challenges. It reminds us that God can use the weak and the few to accomplish great things if we trust and obey Him. Gideon's unorthodox tactics remind contemporary readers and faith communities of the importance of innovation and courage. In times of crisis, it's crucial to think creatively and rely on God's wisdom rather than solely on human strength or conventional strategies. Gideon's humility in acknowledging God's role in his victories serves as a reminder for leaders in faith communities to remain humble and accountable. It warns against the pitfalls of pride and self-reliance, emphasizing the need to give credit where it's due and to remain grounded in God's grace. Gideon's story prompts reflection on the idols and compromises that can creep into our lives and communities. It challenges us to confront anything that takes precedence over our allegiance to God and to remain steadfast in our commitment to His principles. While Gideon's military campaign involved violence, his story calls contemporary readers and faith communities to pursue justice with integrity and to seek peaceful resolutions whenever possible. It reminds us that even in the face of conflict, we are called to uphold moral values and to strive for reconciliation and restoration. In essence, Gideon's legacy encompasses a spectrum of lessons that continue to resonate with contemporary readers and faith communities. It challenges us to live with integrity and trust in God's guidance amidst life's uncertainties. Reflecting upon this timeless story, we are called to emulate Gideon's faith and vigilance. Gideon's journey was marked by a steadfast belief in God's promise and an unwavering commitment to purging idolatry from his midst. His example urges us to examine our own lives, to identify and remove the idols that distract us from our true purpose, and to foster a faith that is bold and unwavering, even in the face of adversity. Thank you for staying till the end of this video. As we navigate our own challenges and uncertainties, let us remember the lessons from Gideon's 300 men. Let us cultivate a faith that moves mountains, a vigilance that guards against the seduction of false idols, and a spirit that trusts in the divine plan, no matter how improbable it may seem. In doing so, we honor the legacy of Gideon and his men, drawing strength and inspiration from their remarkable story as we face the battles in our own lives. Do not forget to leave your comments below and support our work by liking and sharing the video. See you in our next video. God bless you.